Welcome to Between the Cracks. We are traveling again. Today we're in Seattle for what are we here for, Jonathan?
We are here. Well, I'm here because this is my house.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But you are here for Northwest Tea Festival in Seattle this
Yeah.
weekend, September 28th and 9th.
Yeah, that's cool. And this was actually the place that not the place we met, but this was the first time that we had worked together or next to each other, right? Last year.
Yeah, we met last year at Portland Tea Fest PDX in
Yeah.
Portland in July, and then
Yeah.
we worked together pretty closely at Northwest in September
Yeah.
in Seattle.
So, other than the fact that we both sell teaware, so Jonathan makes teaware, right? So he hand makes his own teaware, and he's primarily been into wood firing for pretty much most of your teaware career at this point, right?
Wood firing first, and teaware came in after. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of one of the overlapping pieces. Like we have wood fired wares from Jing Jen, Yue Chao. If you've seen any of our gaiwans and bowls and things like that, we love Yue Chao's stuff. Honestly, they're the only gaiwans that Derek and I use, and you have two of them now. I think?
Two Gaiwans from you,
Yeah,
and a Chao Zhou pot also from you.
yeah. But so wood fired work is more expensive, right?
It is. Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about why for people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I'm constantly kind of dealing with this misconception that wood firing is superior,
Yeah,
hard stop, because it's expensive,
yeah,
or maybe more specifically that it's better for tea,
yeah.
mainly again because of that price point.
Yeah. Which I will say, for clay people, I'll disagree on. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, keep going.
And I struggle with that because I also use really wonderful glazed electric fired factory made teaware that's just really good for tea or
Yeah.
glass. Like my favorite pitchers, I like to use glass personally.
Yeah.
But the conception that it's elevated or more or superior somehow is
Yeah.
built on that price, and the price really just comes down to how much it costs to do and to make.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, wood kilns take anywhere from 2 to 7 days, right? Between like a small wood kiln and a big wood kiln, somewhere in that to fire.
Yeah, a small wood kiln you can get to temp and get really nice results in a weekend, 2 days. You can do shorter, but you're kind of sacrificing results.
Yeah.
And then big, long kilns, just bigger kilns take longer to heat up.
Right.
And so larger kilns, more people, more time. And those usually the big kiln that I fire is 108 hours, so 4.5 days.
Yeah.
Some of them are longer than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's this and for context, if you're like electric firing or gas firing, you can get that done in a day by yourself.
You can
Right,
turn it
like-
on with a computer,
Yeah.
and you can go to bed, and you can come back in the morning, and it'll be done.
Yeah, yeah. And so we're talking about a couple things here. So electric fired is not environmentally fired, right? So that's where we get this, right? You
Atmospheric is the word I would
Sorry,
use.
sorry. Yeah, atmospheric, not environmental. Yeah. It's not atmospherically fired. And so you don't have this inconsistency, which creates intrigue, but also takes a little bit more nuance and working and understanding of the kiln, right?
Yeah, so in a wood kiln, the glaze is in the air. The glaze is in the wood, really, and then as it burns, it's in the air, and then as it heats up, it becomes the surface of the pot.
Yep.
And there's just like a phenomenal action that exchange has to it that's not really repeatable with brushes or even airbrushes or dipping things in buckets or pouring materials or like other methods of glazing.
Yeah.
They're just different, and you're applying material in a different way, and having material in the environment
Yep.
makes for a very unique result.
Right. And so the fact that it's more expensive is from this labor, this difference of result, this experience needed, not necessarily innately that the teapot is any better functioning. It's not necessarily like if you fired this pot in a wood kiln, you fired it in an electric kiln, which one's going to be more expensive?
Well, the wood-fired one needs to be more expensive because I've spent many days stoking the kiln,
Right.
And I need to pay for my time.
Right.
But the electric-fired may be just as like the tea that comes out of it may be just as good. But the visual, the tactile, the aesthetic experience of using it will just be something different.
Yeah.
And so it's a preference thing. And the price point just has to do with the cost of the making.
Right. Yeah. And to the point about like I don't think it's necessarily better. So typically, and maybe you can speak to this too, wood kilns are fired hotter than electric fired unglazed clay bodies. It doesn't have to be this way, but it typically is the way that it ends up being. And so if you're firing a clay pot in a wood kiln, typically with the conditions you're going to use, it's going to be closer to vitrification. It's going to be less porous, and so it's going to do less to the tea. So for those people who are like looking for like I Ching pots because you want it to change the flavor, you want it to soften sharpness in a pu'er or round out something, you're less likely to get that with the same clay body put in a wood kiln. It doesn't have to be that way, but a lot of times it is. And why is that? What is that with the temperature that we see like in a wood kiln that would?
Yeah, it's all a spectrum kind of, and then there's just sort of standards of tradition and history.
Yeah.
And so often what people are looking for in the wood kiln is to get the ash from the wood to melt into a surface.
Yep.
And that is happening at high porcelain vitrification temperatures. But a kiln is just a box and you start a fire in it. And so you can do anything you want with that.
Yeah.
And you can fire a wood kiln to much lower temperatures. You just won't get ash melt. You won't get glass on the surface.
And probably another distinction too that again maybe you're not familiar with is Mark mentioned like yes, okay, it takes multiple days, and it's also typically for bigger kilns it's a community, right? It's multiple people, and so you have multiple artists who are all contributing their own work to this like communal project, right? And so with that, if most people are looking for the soda ash melting, that's probably what you're going to throw your work for or anticipate that that's a potential, right? Or speak with the community about when you're planning for a firing, right?
Yeah, so there's different zones. It's always like there's compromises in every part of that, especially when bigger communities. There's different zones of the kiln, and different people are looking for different results.
Yeah.
For my delicate teapots, I like to have them very protected and deep in the back of the kiln with a lot of other pots in front of them so that they don't get totally like globbed on with glass. And if in a teapot, if the lid doesn't fit, the teapot doesn't work. And so that, can destroy it. But there are lots of other types of forms and vessels. Yeah, like this big tsubo jar that I use for wastewater mostly that can just get totally hammered and high exposure in the kiln.
Yeah.
And a teapot might not survive that situation, but a different type of vessel does.
Right. Right.
The things that make a teapot work have everything to do with the proportions and scales of the pot itself, and finishing that in a cone 6 gas reduction like Mark Muller does, or an electric kiln with glaze, or an electric kiln with no glaze. Like the teapot, in terms of fit and flow and ergonomics and function, has everything to do with the self-contained design of the pot.
Yeah.
And then things like, porosity, water absorbency, that has more to do with the finish and firing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to give up my wood-fired stuff though.
I like it. I'm not going to give it up either.
There's like it's more expensive, but it's worth it. But it's probably not the most new teapot user friendly when you see a wood-fired piece potentially.
Yeah, it tends to be something that people come to after having some experience in tea.
Yeah.
And because it's been where I've been putting my energy for a long time, that's where my like expertise is. But I also, recognize the value of having more accessible options, having more accessible price points, and something on my like to-do list of research and development is to produce lines of wares that are fired in an electric kiln so that I can have different accessibility points, offer teapots for less than $200 as well as offer teapots for this higher end, just because that's what it takes.
And I mean, I'm very excited, not just for myself, but I think for everyone, because I think there's plenty of people who like come by the festivals, right? And they see like you are chasing like, yes, functional teapots, but it's also very much about the art for you too. And I think that is something that like, if you look at Jonathan's pots, they are artistic, and there is this like level of attention and detail and time that it's not just like a little bit more, it's a lot more time that it takes you to make. And so yes, like, are your pots more expensive than most other American potters? They are, but they're worth it. And I think the wood kiln compounding to making it, even more labor. I'm very excited, and I think people are going to be excited to see more of your pots at a cheaper price point that still have like all the same artistic and functional like influence, but are at a more accessible price point. So I can't wait. Is the obsidian glazes that you're working on? That's going to be for electric or non wood kiln?
Yeah, probably. I can probably do it in the wood kiln, but also it could be very useful in a gas reduction.
Okay. So you do that in a gas kiln too okay. Yeah. Would you get a kind of similar like metallic look to that, like Mark gets with his like Glazella? I mean, obviously it'll be not the exact same, but same.
Yeah,
kind of
so
iridescent.
my obsidian glaze project is I've been foraging obsidian in Oregon, collecting it, crushing it, and making glaze out of it. And essentially, that will be a Celadon glaze, like straight out of the ground. I'll need to add a little bit of stuff to help it to fit the clay and melt, but it should be like a transparent green glass that I've mined out of the landscape in Oregon.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So you're mining this obsidian out of Oregon, which is relatively local to you. I mean, not right here in Seattle, but I mean, you're it's close. And I think that's how a lot of teaware starts, right? Like locally. And so like if you look at like in China, the clays they're using, and Mark and I actually just talked about this. If you want to check out that episode, I'll put it up there. We just talked about this last time, how like in China they have, when they started making porcelain and when Jingdezhen became more popular, there was this, this story that like, well, China was the only one whose kilns fired hot enough to like make porcelain. And we kind of talked about how it's like, well, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's probably that like, yes, okay, they could fire hot kilns that could fire to vitrification, but that the clay out of the ground or the porcelain out of the ground was probably just more readily usable. They didn't have to do anything to it originally, 600 years ago when they were, doing porcelain. And that's kind of how all tea culture has developed, more or less, right?
Yeah, well, pottery culture for sure.
Yeah. Not just teaware.
There are many famous pottery places in the world, and most of them are based on and built on the local geology.
Yeah.
And so Jingdezhen is known for porcelain, largely because of the porcelain that's available there.
Yeah.
Yixing teapots and the Juni clay in that area is based largely on the culture, or like the culture is based on the geology.
Yeah.
And the same is true in the Pacific Northwest. Wood fire kilns, we like to fire hot and glassy. That's a very Northwest style. That has mostly to do with the forests in the Northwest. We have a lot of Douglas fir trees that burn very hot.
Right.
Wood firing happening in Montana is different because they have pine forests instead of fir forests. And like clay in North Carolina is very famous for its workability and quality, which is very different than clay in other places in the country or in the world.
It's funny too, because I think about that book on like single source clays, right? From coming out of like the Star Works, like that whole area, right? In like Western North Carolina. And it's kind of largely, it's funny. I don't want to say it's the exact equivalent to Yixing, but it kind of is, where there's this like, okay, there's this, originally there are these single source clays that are more readily, able to be used, or at least people were able to fire them quicker without making any additions or changes like to them. And there's a lot of different like clays that can be used right out of the ground that people in Western North Carolina have been doing.
Clay itself is so variable, and there's so many like spectral differences between the different places in the world where it is.
Yeah.
And then these cultures learn how to use it based on what they have in their ground. And some places are more suitable, and they have become famous over a decade or centuries.
Yeah.
Even like how people choose to use it is different. So in Shigaraki, where I'm going next week, there's very long history, famous clay wood firing and clay culture that goes back many, many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And in Shigaraki, they have a certain lineage and tradition. And then in Iga, which is it's on the other side of the same mountain. They have an entirely different culture and lineage, but they mine the same clay because they're next to the same mountain.
That's interesting.
So the clay is the same, but the culture is different.
And just to back up here, so Shigaraki is in Japan.
Yeah.
Okay. Most of what we know, like Anagama kilns and the wood-fired kilns, historically comes from Japan and like learning from Japan.
Yeah.
But most of your experience has been in Chinese, like Gongfu style for the most part so far, right?
Yeah, the first tea that I really fell in love with was Taiwanese oolong.
Okay.
And then I became familiar with pu'er and gongfu steeping. And then I became familiar with Yixing teapots.
Yeah.
But before even getting into tea at all, I was excited about the wood firing community in Oregon and in the Pacific Northwest, which has a lot of its aesthetic influence from Japan and the Onigama styles in Japan.
Okay.
And of course, they have their whole like a whole behemoth of a tea context in Japan
Right.
too.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious and interested in that, but I'm much more familiar with tea through oolong and pu'er, eventually into white teas and long jings. And now I'm, deep in the weeds
Yeah.
with that.
All drinking everything, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
People ask me my favorite tea and I just go blank. And
Yeah,
and it's not because I don't have favorite. It's just I have, 40.
Which month of the year is it? What was just pressed?
I
Like,
have,
what if I
yeah,
just, yeah,
I
yeah,
have
yeah.
different habits for each of my different favorite
Yeah,
teas.
yeah, yeah. Right, right.
Matcha's somewhere in there, but I have a lot to learn about matcha.
Okay, well, okay. So speaking of matcha, so Jonathan is going to Shigaraki.
Yeah.
We knew he was going to be going to Shigaraki, and we wanted to go to Japan. Derek and I wanted to take Tao Teaware to Japan so that we could get into a little bit more of the Japanese teaware. And so Derek also happens to have off next week, right? And so Derek's going to be meeting up with Jonathan, and we're looking at teas and chawans and teapots and things like that in Japan. So I'm very excited to see what you guys run into, because there's a ceramics festival going on in Shigaraki next week when you guys get there, right?
Yeah, next weekend. So I'm flying across the world, landing in Shigaraki on Thursday, and then there's a 3-day pottery festival Friday through Sunday.
Yeah. I can't wait to see what you guys like uncover at that. I'm very excited.
I have no idea what headspace I'll be in. I'll be overwhelmed for sure.
Derek and I were talking about it last night. We're like, okay, what do we want? We're like going back and forth because, like we're we're a teaware company, right? Yes, we have teas, and we like and drink all of our teas, but primarily like we wanted to help expand the teaware because it's a part of the experience and the culture of drinking teas. And so we were talking about like, okay, well, we have this connection for Senchan, we have this connection for matcha, and basically the culmination of the discussion last night was like, whatever teaware resonates with us, we're going to follow that tea after. And so he's going to meet up with you, go to the festival, see if we get some really nice handmade chawans and that's what we find. Awesome. We'll run with that. We'll go with our matcha contacts and go that route. But if we find some really cool, Shigaraki wares or Bizen wares or, anything that, teapot more related, we'll probably go more with the Senchas. But I can't wait because none of us have any idea. No idea.
I mean, there's something you just gotta like cast your net and go for it. And this international travel experience is, all about trusting whatever might come, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because so when I first moved to China, I tried using an app to learn Chinese. It was terrible. Chinese is like one of the most difficult languages, not to learn, but like all of the apps are designed for things where it's like you take this word and you use this word in another language. But like Chinese, you have to learn the characters, right? You have to learn the Chinese, the pinyin, the pronunciation, the romanization, right? Pronunciation of it. And you have to learn the meaning. So like there would be like words that like, okay, I know that means cat, but I have no idea how to say cat. But I know that's the character for cat, right? So like it was terrible, right? And I knew I wanted to pursue tea. Hadn't had any gongfu tea at the time. And so it took me until I came back to the US for us to start Tao Teaware. Well, Derek, his undergrad was in Chinese culture and histories. He had studied some poetry. He was already into tea and worked in tea houses in the US. And he broke his Gaiwan the first 2 weeks in China, met Master Yin Wei, who became his tea master. And just pursued a whole lineage of like, even though the point here is like trying to give you a little bit of confidence in like, you're not starting from zero because you can already make such good work and you already have such a good eye that I think like if you were to go to a ceramics festival in Japan or China or whatever, and you didn't know anything about it, you might not be able to like have that like third level luck or second level luck that like Derek talks about in T-Soup. Yeah. Where I think you guys are both going to find that independently for whatever you're like looking for you, a teacher or somebody who can like show you something new with forms, and then him, hopefully for teaware for us, where like just, the balance, the pour, whatever it is that's like, wouldn't be something if we would be going to a country for the first time and didn't have that experience but we also still have no idea.
Yeah. So my plan is to go. I'm going to the Shigaraki Ceramic Cultural Park, and
Yeah.
I have a studio artist residency, which is
3 months.
it's my trip is 3 months.
Okay.
My residency is 11 weeks.
Okay.
And then I have a little bit of time to do some tourism kind of stuff at
Yep.
the end. So my plan is to go and like bring my momentum that I currently have into the studio and get busy, like make my work week one. But then also to like just keep this open mind to be totally derailed and willing to be like pulled into whatever inspiring direction I may happen to find. And right now that is complete mystery. But like what I don't want is to go and then try to figure out what to do. My plan is to like go with a plan to get busy and then be ready to have that plan change.
How getting busy happens could evolve and change. Yeah. And I think, I mean, that sounds like good plan to me. So speaking of being busy, you've laid a lot of groundwork this year, right?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah,
in the
for
last
sure.
3 months, you built your studio, and it's not done yet, but there are 2 kilns. You have space for firing and work and things like that. You also started teaching not only like pottery classes, but specifically teaware classes, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool. Like, this is one of the things, like, we talk about how, like, being in the Pacific Northwest, it just has a more developed tea culture. And there's pros and cons. Like, we talked about earlier, it's more expensive here. But at the same time, you were able to run a full teaware class with how many students last session?
I had 2 different teaware classes, one with 8 students and one with 12 students.
Okay, so 20 total students who were just interested in making teaware.
Yep.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Like for a young kind of budding, like we are not a tea country for sure, right? But like to have like be in a space, that's so cool. So with that, this last one you did every type of teaware, right? Or you went through like main works that you work with?
Yeah, so it was an 8-week curriculum on teaware, and we covered gongfu teapots, gaiwan, pitchers, cups, how I approach those things.
Did you do the jars too?
I did a demo on the big jar and like waste bowl, like a chaff bowl.
Yeah.
I showed my wooden trays. I brought in a lot of my different kind of collection of works, as well as went through demonstrations of my own making.
Yeah. But next time you're actually going to go through and you're thinking about doing like an 8-week course, like just on a teapot.
I'm
right?
thinking about it. Yeah,
That would be so cool.
I'm this fall. I'm in Japan, so I let
Right.
all my classes go for the term. But
Yeah.
in the winter term in January, I'll likely be starting a new class, and I've been mulling over the idea of spending a whole 8 weeks just on a single teapot, or like all of the variations of teapot.
Yeah. So one kind of like mutual, like legendary connection that we have through me knowing you and Mark is Alion, right? So
Sure.
I still haven't met him. Mark has met him. Mark has a pot from him, a bowl from him. And you shared with me that it was like this old PDF from like a class in like, was it 2001 or something like that?
Something like that.
With like all the different ways to, like looking at like how to seat the teapot and all the different ways you can do a handle and like the effect of putting a spout in different places. So how are you like, if you were to do an 8-week class, that's a lot of time. Like what would you do? Like what would you do like for, if you were doing, for each of the days, for example, like what would you give us the overview?
Yeah, so like you could spend a whole week just on the shape of the body of the pot and the difference between like a spherical pot and a flat bottomed like wide base pot, or a pear shape, or a tall shoulder apple shape. You could spend a whole week just talking about that, and then how water flows through those things a little bit differently, and how heat moves through them differently, and then like how a lid fits could be a whole nother week, and why you might want to have a wide mouth or versus a narrow mouth. Yeah. So for example, like this teapot is a little bit squat, kind of a persimmon shape. And then it has a shoulder and comes to a fairly narrow top, but not so narrow that you can't get the leaves out after you're done using them, which is, a lot of potters aesthetically gravitate towards this very small
Smaller
opening.
it is, the prettier it is, but
It's pretty, and then it doesn't work, and then
Yeah.
and so then there's a whole like conceptual conversation around whether or not the teapot needs to meet certain standards of use, and then everyone chooses their side in this big argument, then we have fisticuffs. And it's me and Mark against the world.
That's why you guys are my friends.
Yeah. And then like, spout design length and attachment points and proportions. This one kind of starts in a little bit above the middle and is very kind of squat and short. It works pretty well. I kind of have been leaning towards a little bit of a longer spout recently.
I see some, you're hanging out with Mark this year, right?
I have been hanging out with Mark.
A little bit more of a pooch, maybe?
No, bear. Okay, maybe a little bit.
Yeah. It comes from the Allian design, and Mark's, if you've seen his teapots, he has this like really like, I don't want to say obnoxious, but what's the iconic?
Pronounced.
Yeah, it looks like a water droplet, and it's like this big like water drop pouch pooch sack thing on the front.
When you say it like that, sounds good. No, it's better than that actually. Yeah. It works well.
It does work very well.
Yeah.
So and the main thing for like having this area is at some point there's always going to be a bottleneck in the flow, right? And so the idea with having the pooch shape is the water can flow into that shape, and so you have more control over the speed of the pour. Jonathan's pots go more towards this kind of glass rod. What's the other? I hear other people using another term too.
Laminar flow.
Yeah. People say has more laminar flow. What does that mean? Well, it's just a pretty smooth like rod. You're not controlling the speed. It's just you start pouring, and it's just a very contiguous, like beautiful. And you see people in the Chinese videos, right, doing the like, if it can pour from here, it's really good.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. And actually, I've seen some people talking about how like Gus from Rivers and Lakes will be like, well, actually, you want it to be closer to the pot because like people who are more into tea are like everything that matters for the tea versus the. It doesn't. It's all fun.
It's good to have a lot of different preferences and styles and different things to nerd out about. And it's like whether you can cover the air hole on the lid and it will stop the flow is something that people like to see or craftsmen like to show off. But whether it makes better tea or not is a open question.
No, it does. 100%. So there's this one pot that I got I'm still on loan from Derek. I still need to give it back to him. Master Inoue gave it to him. And it has one of the lids that has the handle that goes over the top.
Oh, yeah.
And the air hole's underneath.
Yeah.
Right? You can't cover it.
Right.
Which means you'll never accidentally cover it.
Right.
So, like, practically, it's like, oh, it doesn't do the, like, cool gimmicky thing.
The gimmicky thing, yeah.
But it actually makes it more functional, like, in some ways. So it's, like, there are all these things of, like, does it matter?
Well, it just depends if it matters to you.
Yeah.
I think as far as craftsmanship goes, it's a nice example of, careful precision.
Yeah.
But as far as tea steeping goes, it may be completely irrelevant.
Yeah. And I think that's something like Mark and I will talk about a lot too, is like, was there intention in the potter doing what they did? And I think that's like, was there intention there, or was it kind of lackluster that it ended up with that thing? Which is why I love your pots. Iteration over years and years. Do we have
a Mark pot?
No, one of your old one. Yeah.
These pots are great together because they have a similar surface going on.
Yeah.
This one I made earlier this year, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
This one's from 2017. And this, like, I feel like this is this, like, protogenic version of, where its own future is leading. And in some ways, it's a little embarrassing because it has some proportional issues and some precision issues. But at the same time, I look at it very fondly because it kind of represents my own unachieved potential.
Yeah.
And, there's some future ahead of this that I, can't even imagine that, that this represents the untapped potential of that, right?
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing, so this actually, last time I picked up and held it, and again, this, all progression, it doesn't feel good, but it actually looks like that workshop that you just did, where you did like the more like that, like sculptural kind of more like, it looks more like that. But I guarantee even if you like recreated this now and wanted to make it look like that, it would still be a lot like better functionally, like the balance, the like, yeah. And just going back to intentionality, like it can look different. And
look at that filter.
It's good. It's good. It's a good.
It's not. But like we are all starting somewhere, right? Yeah. And there's no there's only like
Lammin or flow.
places to go. Yeah, we don't have to pour out of this one.
All right. Well, probably should go get ready for the festival, huh?
Tea festival setup is today,
Yeah.
and festival is tomorrow and Sunday.
Yeah. So if you're here for Northwest Tea Fest, can't wait to see you guys. And otherwise, we'll catch you next time we're in Seattle.
Yeah, we got to drink some more tea.
Yeah. Peace. It's my sign off. He's my sign off.